So what if the thoughts you wake up with tomorrow morning, like, aren't actually yours?
Oh, wow. Starting right out of the gate with that.
Well, I mean, think about it. What if they're just suggestions, queued up by some hidden algorithm?
It's a slightly terrifying proposition, isn't it?
Yeah.
To realize you might just be like binge watching your own anxieties on autoplay
Exactly.
and just assuming that because a thought is currently in your head, you must be the one who actively chose to put it there.
Right, which is just wild. And that exact provocation, that's the foundation of what we are examining today. So welcome, everyone. We are officially kicking off Double Feature Part 1.
Yes, we are.
We're taking this massive stack of research we've got and systematically exploring chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15 of our source material.
And these specific chapters, they really do fundamentally challenge that core assumption most of us hold, right?
Well, completely.
That deeply ingrained belief that we are the ones fully in control, that we're making, autonomous, conscious decisions every single second of the day.
Which, spoiler alert, we aren't. We are basically looking at the hidden architecture of human behavior.
Yeah, so the mission for our analysis today for this deep dive is to really deconstruct what we're calling the hidden operating system of our lives.
The OS.
Right, the OS. We're going to explore this radical and frankly completely necessary transition from being just a passive user of your own life to becoming the architect of it.
I love that framing. User to architect.
It requires accessing the back-end code, basically, of your daily existence, which most people never even realize is running in the background.
Yeah, and to you, the listener, I just want to make it super clear right now that this deep dive is custom tailored for you.
Definitely.
Whether you're feeling, chronically burnt out, creatively stuck, maybe you're navigating some major life transition, or honestly, if you're just insanely curious about how your own psychology actually works under the hood.
This is the blueprint.
It really is. We are going to examine how your mind curates your attention, how your body navigates physical reality, and, this is the big one for me, how to stop being tossed around by your own emotional weather.
Because most people spend their entire lives living in a purely reactive state.
Right, just bouncing from one thing to the next.
Exactly. They're responding to external stimuli, to inherited psychological scripts from childhood, to, digital notifications.
Nameless notifications.
And sudden emotional spikes, right. And they do all this without ever pausing to ask who or what actually designed the interface they're reacting to.
Yeah.
So today, we map out that interface, and more importantly, we explore how to rewrite it.
Okay, so to even begin rewriting the code, we obviously have to establish the starting line, which brings us right to Chapter 12's Framing the Modern Condition.
Right.
The sources draw this really sharp distinction between the user interface, the UI, and the operating system, the OS.
It's a great metaphor.
It is. And if we look at the average person's daily experience, they are just completely trapped in the UI.
Yeah, the technology metaphor really maps perfectly onto human consciousness here. I mean, think about your average Tuesday morning. You wake up, and what is the very first thing you do?
I grab my phone before I even open both eyes.
Exactly. You reach for your phone, you check the weather app, which, feeds you environmental data.
Right.
You check your email, which feeds you external demands and tasks. You might look at your bank app to see your balance.
Or Instagram to see what I'm missing out on.
Right. So you're interacting with these bright, highly optimized icons on a screen. But the text argues that we do the exact same thing with our own internal consciousness.
Oh man, I see exactly where this is going.
Yeah.
We treat our internal states like desktop icons.
Yes.
I mean, I absolutely do this with my smartwatch. It's almost embarrassing.
Oh, the sleep trackers.
Yes. I will wake up, feel, relatively okay, but then I'll check my sleep score. And if a watch says I only got like a 62 for recovery, I suddenly feel exhausted.
Like it gives you permission to be tired.
Exactly. It's like I need a piece of glass and some proprietary algorithm to give me permission to decide if I actually feel rested or not.
Well, that is the quintessential user interface trap right there. You are deferring entirely to the display layer.
It's so backwards.
It is. The sources argue that we spend about 95% of our waking life just staring at the desktop icons of our brains.
95%.
Yeah. These are our to-do lists, our daily schedules, passing anxieties, performance metrics. The UI is bright, it's loud, and it is explicitly designed to grab your attention.
It wants to be clicked.
Right. But it's just the display layer. It is not the actual machinery. It doesn't dictate how the system functions on a fundamental core level.
So we're essentially just frantically clicking icons on a mental desktop, like
Yeah.
moving folders around, hoping that changing the appearance of the screen will somehow change how the processor works underneath.
That's exactly it.
It's like trying to fix a hardware issue by,
By changing the wallpaper.
yes, changing the wallpaper.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this leads directly into that critical distinction between the user and the architect.
Right. Let's get into that.
So the user is someone who just accepts the default settings. They click the menus that are already provided to them. If a notification pops up, whether that's an email on their phone or like a sudden spike of jealousy in their chest, they simply react to it.
They just click OK and let the program run.
Exactly. They operate entirely within the boundaries defined by legacy software.
Legacy software. So you're talking about the mental equivalent of like running Windows 95 in a modern world that requires iOS 17 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like these old childhood scripts are bottlenecking the modern hardware.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it, actually. In human terms, legacy software refers to these behavioral and emotional scripts that were written when you were, say, 8 or 14 years old.
Right, when you were just a kid trying to survive middle school.
Right. You encountered some stressful environment, and your brain just quickly wrote a script to help you survive it.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. So it might be a script that says, if there is conflict, I must completely shut down and become invisible. Or maybe, if I feel overwhelmed, I have to immediately control everyone around me.
Oh, man, I know a few people running that second script.
We all do. But the problem is that code is still executing when you're 35 in situations that absolutely no longer require it.
It's totally maladaptive now.
Exactly. But the user doesn't question these scripts. They just run them because they're the default settings.
But the architect, on the other hand, recognizes that the code is outdated.
Right. The architect accesses the back end. They realize they actually possess the capacity to rewrite the scripts.
They don't just stare at the icon.
No, they understand why the icons are there in the first place. They don't just ask, how do I stop feeling anxious? They ask, what underlying line of code is generating this anxiety icon on my desktop to begin with?
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. They aren't trapped by the menu because they realize they can program an entirely new menu.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because I feel like modern culture sells us a very different definition of what it actually means to be in control.
Oh, absolutely. How so?
Well, think about the self-optimization culture. I track my sleep, right? I use a highly detailed budgeting app to track every single dollar I spend. I log my meals to make sure my macros are perfectly balanced.
The quantified self.
Exactly. I track my daily steps, my heart rate variability. I have built this massive dashboard of personal metrics. And our culture tells me that all this data makes me the ultimate architect of my life.
It definitely feels empowering.
Yeah. It feels like I'm a pilot in this high-tech cockpit, surrounded by highly calibrated dials, steering the ship with absolute precision. Doesn't that make me the architect?
It's an incredibly common and honestly highly encouraged illusion.
An illusion.
Yeah, and the source material addresses this phenomenon directly. Having an abundance of data is not the same thing as having wisdom.
Ouch. Okay.
Think about your pilot analogy. You can be surrounded by 1,000 dials in a cockpit, but if you don't actually know the fundamental principles of aerodynamics,
Right.
or if you're so fixated on the altimeter that you literally never look out the window, you are still going to crash the plane.
Wow.
Okay, fair point.
The text identifies this modern obsession with constant metric tracking as a severe form of disembodiment.
Disembodiment.
Yes. We're living in our thoughts about life and in our measurements of life, rather than actually participating in life itself.
Okay, disembodiment. I think a lot of people hearing that word would immediately push back.
I'm sure they would.
They'd say, wait, I go to the gym for an hour every day. I lift heavy weights. I do intense cardio. I am hyper-connected to my physical body.
Well, that brings us to one of the most illuminating comparisons in the text, and it illustrates exactly why conventional working out might actually be a symptom of this exact disembodiment.
Really, working out is disembodied.
The sources draw a very rigid boundary between the concept of exercise and the concept of movement. Okay, but in common parlance, we use those as complete synonyms. Like, if I'm exercising, I'm moving.
We do, but structurally, according to this framework, they are radically different operating systems.
Explain that.
So, in the context of this psychological framework, exercise is profoundly disembodied. It is entirely goal-focused.
It's about the metrics.
Exactly. It's about calories, metrics, sets, reps, hitting a specific predetermined target. If you're on a treadmill, you're likely staring at the little screen to see if you've burned exactly 500 calories.
Guilty.
Or you're looking in the mirror to critique the precise angle of your bicep curl.
It's entirely performance-driven. The internal monologue is always an assessment, right? Like, am I doing this right? Is my heart rate in the optimal fat-burning zone? Am I optimizing my time here?
Yes, and the foundational hierarchy there is what the text calls mind leads, body follows.
Mind leads, body follows.
The conscious mind has decided on a metric, and the physical body is treated merely as a tool to achieve it.
Just a machine.
The text actually bluntly describes this dynamic as treating the body like a stubborn donkey.
A donkey.
Yeah. The mind is the rider, basically whipping the donkey to force it up the hill to hit a quota.
Oh my gosh.
You're not actually present in your physical experience. You are living entirely in the metric on the screen or the goal in your head.
The body as a donkey that the mind is whipping to get up the hill. I mean, that is a brutal but completely accurate visualization of how a lot of gym culture operates.
It really is.
You're just ignoring joint pain, ignoring fatigue, just to satisfy the data point on your app.
Exactly.
So what is the alternative then? What constitutes movement if exercise is the donkey?
Movement is inherently embodied. It is present-focused rather than future-focused. In movement, the individual acts as a unified system where physical expression externalizes inner states.
So no screens.
No screen, no calorie target. The hierarchy shifts from mind leads, body follows to mind and body move together.
They sync up.
Exactly. It's closing the gap. When the body runs, the mind runs. It's acting as an integrated network rather than a master dictating terms to a servant. You run because the kinetic act of running feels necessary in that exact moment.
Not because I need to offset the caloric intake of the sandwich I ate at lunch.
Exactly.
Okay, if I translate that back to the data tracking obsession we discussed earlier, staring at my highly organized budgeting app and feeling my chest tighten as I obsess over my spending categories. That is the disembodied exercise version of finance.
Yes. That's a perfect application.
I'm letting the UI panic me. I have all the data in the world, but I have zero wisdom about my actual financial behaviors, like the emotional voids I might be trying to fill with impulsive Amazon purchases, or my deep-seated fears about scarcity.
Exactly. Transitioning to the architect means moving from that disembodied tracking to embodied wisdom. It means stepping entirely out of the UI, taking your eyes off the dashboard dials, and actually looking at the deeper systems driving the behavior.
Which bridges us perfectly from the operating system to the very first piece of hidden code we need to examine today.
Yes, chapter 13.
Right. In chapter 13, the sources present a metaphor for human attention that honestly completely changed how I view my own thought patterns. We are looking at the mind as a streaming service.
It's a brilliant, highly contemporary way to understand the curation of our consciousness.
It really is. The core concept here is that your mind does not just neutrally reflect reality. It operates exactly like Spotify or Netflix or TikTok.
Right. It has a recommendation engine.
Yes. There is an active algorithm running in your brain that suggests thoughts, memories, and anxieties to you based entirely on your past viewing history.
And we readily accept that our digital platforms operate this way. I mean, if you spend 20 minutes watching YouTube videos about, say, extreme weather events or structural engineering failures,
Your feed is instantly flooded.
instantly. Thumbnails of tornadoes, collapsing bridges, hurricanes everywhere. The algorithm learns exactly what holds your attention. And the source material argues that your brain utilizes the exact same mechanism. It is, at its core, a predictive engine.
And the most dangerous part of this, which the text points out explicitly, is that this internal algorithm is totally devoid of morality.
It doesn't care.
No, it is neither good nor bad. It is purely an optimization machine, and its only currency is engagement.
Right.
It genuinely does not care if a thought makes you miserable or depressed or terrified or paralyzed. It only cares that you are paying attention to it.
This requires us to drastically reevaluate what we choose to dwell on throughout the day. Let's look at the specific example provided in the text regarding binging anxiety.
Yeah, walk us through that.
Okay, imagine you wake up and while you're brushing your teeth, a thought about a looming financial deadline just pops into your head.
Happens all the time.
Right. And if you spend the next 45 minutes dwelling on that financial panic, like analyzing it, arguing with it in your head, spiraling down into these elaborate worst-case scenarios about losing your house, your internal algorithm is taking meticulous notes.
It's like tagging financial panic as high engagement content.
Yes.
It essentially says, wow, the user absolutely loves this money problems category today. They engaged with it for nearly an hour. Let's optimize their experience.
Exactly.
And then it just automatically queues up 47 more money anxieties for you to watch tomorrow morning.
It operates on the core assumption that attention equals preference, and that leads directly to what the text calls the autoplay trap.
The autoplay trap. That sounds bleak.
The tragic reality for the passive user is that they live their entire lives just sitting on the couch of their own mind, letting the playlist cycle through whatever the algorithm serves up.
Just passively watching.
Yeah. They let arguments from 5 years ago, worst-case scenarios about the future, deeply ingrained insecurities, they just let them run on an endless loop, staring blankly at the internal screen, assuming they have no choice but to watch.
Okay, this is where we have to anchor this in reality. Because metaphors are great, but the application is where it actually gets difficult.
Sure.
I understand that my brain is queuing up these thoughts like Netflix thumbnails.
Yeah.
But I can't just forcefully stop a thumbnail from appearing on my screen, right? It just shows up.
Right.
If the algorithm serves a terrible, anxious thought, it is suddenly just there in my consciousness. I can't prevent the delivery.
That is a crucial distinction, and the text is very precise about this. You are absolutely correct. You cannot stop the suggestion.
Okay.
You cannot control the initial thought that pops into your head. That is just the algorithm executing its predictive programming based on your historical data. However, while you cannot stop the suggestion, you do possess a skip button.
Meaning I have the agency to choose not to press play on the thumbnail.
Precisely. You see the thumbnail for Financial Panic Season 4 pop up in your consciousness. The passive user clicks it immediately and loses an hour of their morning.
Right.
But the architect sees the thumbnail, acknowledges that it's a highly engaging piece of historical content, and simply chooses not to engage. You don't click it, you don't dwell on it, you don't start writing elaborate mental fan fiction for the worst case scenario.
Conceptually, I am totally on board. But experientially, that is incredibly hard to do in the moment.
Oh, absolutely.
When your heart is racing, your palms are sweating, and the anxious thought feels like an urgent life or death reality, simply choosing not to press play feels, frankly, physically impossible.
And the source material anticipates that exact friction, which is why it doesn't just leave us with a neat metaphor. It provides a highly specific tactical intervention called the circuit breaker protocol.
It's a circuit breaker protocol.
It's a 4-step process designed to forcefully break a downward mental cue. And the foundational premise of this protocol is that you cannot interrupt a mental binge from inside the binge.
What do you mean by that?
If you are deep in a shame spiral, your prefrontal cortex is compromised. Your fight-or-flight system is active. You literally cannot think your way out of a thinking problem.
Because the hardware is flooded.
Yeah.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of this 4-step protocol. If my mind is auto-playing a horror movie about my career, how do I grab the remote and execute the circuit breaker?
Okay, step 1 is the physical interrupt. This is arguably the most vital step, and unfortunately, the one most people skip.
Physical interrupt.
You cannot solve a physiological and psychological loop using the exact same mind and the exact same environment that generated it. If you're sitting slumped in your office chair spiraling about an email, you must physically change your state.
So get up.
Stand up, walk to the kitchen, splash freezing cold water on your face, do 10 jumping jacks, shake your arms out.
The physical movement is required to disrupt the neural firing pattern.
Yes.
Like if I stay in the exact same physical posture staring at the exact same wall, the environment itself is acting as a trigger, signaling the brain to let the autoplay continue.
Exactly. You have to break the environmental context to reset the baseline. Once you've physically interrupted the state. Step 2 is to name the binge.
Name the binge.
You must verbally or mentally acknowledge what the underlying system is doing, effectively stripping it of its power. You say, out loud if you're alone, I am in a downward queue right now, or I am currently binge-watching anxiety about my career.
I find that framing incredibly powerful. I'm binge-watching anxiety.
It shifts everything.
It does. It creates this immediate, profound psychological distance. It shifts me away from identifying with the emotion, saying, I am anxious, which makes the anxiety my core identity.
Right.
Just saying, I am watching anxiety, which accurately categorizes it as just a passing piece of algorithmic content.
It forces the perspective shift from the user who is drowning in the UI to the architect who is observing the system mechanics from the outside.
Okay, so I've stood up. I've named the binge. What's step 3?
Once you have named it, step 3 is to time box it. You give the emotion a strict temporal limit. You set a literal timer on your phone for 5 minutes and say, okay, anxiety, you get exactly 5 more minutes of my undivided attention.
Wow, so you don't fight it.
No, you lean in, but with boundaries. You say, I will write down every terrible thought, I will feel the dread completely, but the second this timer goes off, the episode ends.
You give it a definitive endpoint so it doesn't just bleed out and contaminate your entire Tuesday. You compartmentalize the crisis.
Exactly.
And what is the final step once that timer goes off?
Step 4 is replace the feed, which the text also refers to as changing the channel. You cannot just leave a vacuum in your attention.
Because nature abhors a vacuum.
And the algorithm abhors a vacuum even more. It will immediately fill it with the old familiar panic. You have to actively introduce what the text calls an off-brand experience.
Off-brand. Like intentionally consuming something that directly contradicts your usual habits.
Exactly. You must consume something that falls completely outside your typical algorithmic preferences. If your internal algorithm is currently looping highly anxious, fast-paced, stressful thoughts, you need to intentionally introduce cognitive dissonance.
Give me some examples of that.
Put on a piece of slow, classical music. Read a dense poem. Step outside and force yourself to observe the intricate details of a tree trunk for 60 seconds.
Just completely change the vibe.
Or, on a broader lifestyle scale, read essays that argue against your deepest political convictions. Listen to a genre of music you are convinced you hate.
What is the architectural purpose of forcing yourself to be off-brand, though? Why is that necessary for the system?
Because if you only ever consume the exact same inputs, both digitally and mentally, your internal algorithm becomes rigid and hyper-specialized. It puts you in a tiny, claustrophobic box.
You just become an echo chamber.
You stop growing, your neuroplasticity drops, and you become a highly predictable caricature of yourself. The architect understands that they must keep the system in discovery mode. By regularly feeding the brain off-brand experiences, you keep the algorithm flexible. It retains the capacity to suggest new, innovative, lateral thoughts, instead of just constantly looping your greatest hits of trauma and stress.
We have to actively keep our own internal algorithms guessing to maintain our cognitive flexibility. That is brilliant. It completely changes how I view my daily habits.
It's a game changer.
So we have established the mind as this streaming service that curates our attention and chooses the content we focus on. But that only covers our internal processing.
Right, there's a whole world out there.
Exactly. We exist in physical space. We have to steer the vehicle of our lives through the real world. Which brings us to Chapter 14, where the focus shifts from the mind to the body, exploring the body as a navigation system, or the GPS.
Yes. If the mind is the streaming service providing the entertainment and the theoretical itinerary, the body is the actual hardware executing the journey through physical space.
The vehicle itself.
Right. And Chapter 14 introduces what is arguably the ultimate conflict of modern life, the massive, crushing discrepancy between our mental plans and our physical reality. The sources frame this conflict as the map versus the GPS.
Let's define these terms with absolute clarity to really see how they fit into the larger architecture of the OS we've been building.
Sure. So the map is your conscious mind. It is a static, theoretical document that was drafted in the past.
So like a to-do list.
Exactly. It could be the highly optimistic daily schedule you wrote out last night, or your grand, sweeping 5-year career trajectory. The defining characteristic of the map is that it assumes perfect conditions.
Which never exists.
Never. It assumes zero friction, optimal health, flawless execution, endless energy, and a world that behaves exactly as you predict it will.
The map is the idealized itinerary. It dictates I will wake up at 5 a.m., do a grueling hour of exercise, engage in 4 hours of unbroken deep work, cook a perfectly balanced organic meal from scratch, and then read 50 pages of philosophy before bed.
Sounds lovely.
It's clean. It's deeply logical. And as anyone who has ever lived a single day on planet Earth knows, it is usually a complete and utter fantasy.
It is a fantasy because it lacks real-time environmental data. And that is exactly where the GPS enters the equation. The GPS is your physical body, your somatic nervous system, and it operates as a real-time, live updating navigation system that is constantly reading the actual terrain.
And the sources drop a massive empirical data point here to illustrate the terrifying difference in processing power between the map of the conscious mind and the GPS of the physical body.
The math on this is astounding.
Can you detail the 11 million versus 40 bits discrepancy?
Yeah.
Because understanding this math completely revolutionized how I view my own physical sensations.
It is a staggering biological reality. Neuroscientists estimate that the human nervous system, your physical body, your peripheral nerves, your senses, processes approximately 11 million bits of information every single second.
Wait, 11 million bits of data per second?
Per second.
Let's make that concrete. What exactly constitutes those 11 million bits? Like, what is the body doing?
It is the raw, unfiltered totality of reality. Your body is constantly monitoring the ambient temperature of the room. It is registering the exact barometric pressure.
Wow.
It's noticing microscopic shifts in the facial expressions and pupil dilations of the people you're talking to. It's tracking the microtremors in their vocal cords that indicate stress or deception.
So it's reading people before we even know we're reading them.
Absolutely. And internally, it is constantly measuring your blood sugar, balancing your hormone levels, initiating immune responses to pathogens you inhaled but don't even know you're fighting off, all while digesting your breakfast.
Yeah, it is insane.
11 million bits of complex, interdependent data processed continuously.
And compared to that massive supercomputer, what is the processing capacity of the conscious mind? The map.
The conscious mind, the part of you that is actively thinking about your to-do list, plotting your career moves, and listening to this conversation right now, processes only about 40 to 50 bits of information per second.
That discrepancy is almost comical. 11 million bits of reality versus 40 bits of conscious thought.
It's a tiny fraction.
We are trying to navigate the infinite complexity of reality through a tiny 40-bit keyhole, and our ego convinces us that we are seeing the entire universe.
It is the ultimate hubris of the conscious mind. The dynamic is like a CEO sitting in a sterile corner office making massive corporate decisions based on a single one-page summary memo, the 40 bits.
Right.
While the body is the entire global research and development department on the ground gathering terabytes of nuanced real-time data, the 11 million bits.
And the tragedy of the modern user is that our culture trains us to idolize the 40-bit map and constantly, chronically override the 11 million-bit GPS.
Yes, we celebrate ignoring the body.
I want to introduce an analogy here to see if I'm really grasping the mechanics of this. It feels exactly like driving down the interstate and your phone's Google Maps suddenly screams at you, massive traffic accident ahead, the bridge is out, rerouting, adding 45 minutes to your trip.
We've all been there.
And instead of listening to the live data, we just yell back at our phones, no, that is unacceptable. My printed map says I should go straight, and I have a strict schedule to keep.
Right.
So we press the accelerator to the floor and drive straight into a 10-car pileup, completely shocked that our plan didn't work out.
That analogy perfectly captures the exact mechanism that leads to what we colloquially call burnout.
Burnout.
Burnout is heavily misunderstood in our culture. It is not a moral failing. It is not a sign of weak character or a lack of ambition.
Which is how it's usually framed.
Always.
Yeah.
But burnout is a literal systemic crash caused by a driver who chronically overrides the vehicle's navigation system. Your body constantly sends you signals. A sudden onset of physical tension, a chronically tight jaw, a heavy sensation in your chest, sudden extreme fatigue in the middle of a project, or even profound, unshakable boredom.
Just feeling totally checked out.
Yeah. The text categorizes these physical sensations as reroute signals. They are not weaknesses. They are just the 11 million bit GPS saying the conditions on the ground have changed. The metabolic or psychological route we planned yesterday is no longer optimal. Recalculating.
But because we are trapped in the 40-bit map, we view those vital diagnostic signals as failures.
Exactly.
If I feel a wave of exhaustion at 2:00 p.m. when my rigid schedule dictates that I need to write a flawless business proposal, I don't think, my GPS is processing unseen variables and suggesting a reroute.
Yeah, you judge yourself.
I think, I am lazy, I am falling behind, I need to drink a double espresso and forcefully push through this weakness.
And the human body is incredibly resilient. If you do that once or twice, the system absorbs the shock and keeps moving.
Sure.
But if you do that every single day for 5 years, constantly whipping the donkey, constantly driving into the pileup, the GPS eventually realizes that the driver is completely deaf to its signals. It realizes the driver is a literal threat to the survival of the vehicle. Yeah. And so the system initiates a hard shutdown. You get violently ill. You experience a panic attack that physically floors you. The engine blows out. That is burnout.
Okay, my highly ambitious, goal-oriented side is screaming right now, and I have to push back.
Let's hear it.
If my body's GPS says, take a nap, or this particular project feels incredibly heavy and draining, stop doing it.
Yeah.
But I am actively trying to build a business or finish a medical degree or earn enough money to support my family. Do I just surrender?
That's the fear.
Yeah. Am I supposed to abandon my goals and just lie on the couch because my physical body says it's tired?
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for total stagnation.
That is the most common fear when people first encounter this concept, but it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of how a GPS actually functions. Let's look at the literal mechanics of a navigation system.
Okay.
If you plug a destination into Google Maps, say you decide you want to drive from New York to San Francisco, the GPS does not argue with you about the destination. It doesn't analyze your input and say, San Francisco is a terrible idea, let's go to Denver instead. The GPS accepts your destination as a given. What it does is constantly calculate the most optimal, sustainable route to get you to that destination without destroying the car along the way.
Oh, that completely flips the dynamic.
Doesn't it? If your conscious goal is to build a successful business, your body is not telling you to abandon the business. It is telling you that the specific route you are currently taking, working 80-hour weeks, sleeping 4 hours a night, fueling your nervous system entirely with cortisol, anxiety, and caffeine, is a route that leads directly over a cliff.
It's warning me about the route, not the destination.
Exactly. The GPS is saying, I have the capacity to get you to a successful business, but we have to reroute right now to a path of sustainable pacing, proper rest, and strategic delegation. Otherwise, the vehicle will literally not survive the trip.
The GPS does not question the destination. It actively opposes routes that will destroy the vehicle. That is such a profoundly relieving way to conceptualize it.
It changes everything about how we view productivity.
It completely removes the guilt and the moral failure from the concept of resting. Rest isn't giving up. Rest is simply recalibrating the route to ensure you actually arrive.
Exactly.
And this ties into another fascinating concept the sources bring up regarding the body's intelligence. Offline maps. How does that feature into the architecture?
Offline maps represent what the text refers to as somatic wisdom. Again, think about how your phone's GPS works. If you are driving deep into the mountains, you might lose your cellular signal. You have no active connection to the live network.
Right.
But if you had the foresight to download the map to your phone's hard drive previously, the GPS can still track your exact location and guide you safely through the dead zone.
It relies on localized, stored data rather than a live feed.
Your physical body utilizes the exact same mechanism when your logical 40-bit conscious mind is completely lost or overwhelmed.
Oh, I felt this.
We all have. You meet a potential business partner, or you're offered a highly lucrative job. On paper, on the logical 40-bit map, everything looks utterly perfect. The salary is incredible, the benefits are flawless, the person is polite and has an impeccable resume.
Checking all the boxes.
But the moment you sit across from them, your stomach drops. Your chest physically tightens. You get a profound, undeniable gut feeling that something is deeply, structurally wrong.
And immediately, your 40-bit conscious mind starts aggressively arguing with your body, saying, what are you talking about? Look at the pros and cons list. Look at the spreadsheet. It's perfect. Stop being irrational.
But you are not being irrational. You are processing at a higher bandwidth. Your 11 million-bit GPS is recognizing microscopic patterns of danger, deception, or deep incompatibility. It's drawing on decades of stored experiential data, your offline maps, that your conscious mind hasn't even begun to articulate yet.
That makes so much sense.
The architect is the person who learns to deeply trust that offline map. They understand that the physical body processes the complex reality of the terrain long before the conscious mind can draw a neat little map of it.
This perfectly sets up our next major exploration. To prove that ignoring the GPS isn't just a, quirky metaphor for personal productivity or avoiding a mild case of burnout, the sources scale this entire concept up.
Way up.
They demonstrate that the conflict between the map and the GPS can result in catastrophic systemic failure on a global scale.
Yeah.
We're looking at a historical macro-level case study now.
Yes. And before we examine the mechanics of this, it is crucial to state clearly that the text utilizes this historical example strictly as an impartial, architectural analysis of strategic failure.
Right, definitely.
We are examining the dynamics of the map versus the GPS at a geopolitical scale, specifically analyzing the architectural flaws in Adolf Hitler's military strategy during World War II.
Absolutely. We are looking exclusively at the mechanics of failure here, stripping away the ideology to see exactly how the system broke down. So, how does the text frame this historical event as the ultimate failure of the architect?
The sources detail how the military strategy of the Third Reich was fundamentally structurally self-defeating because it was constructed entirely upon a rigid, delusional map that aggressively and systematically ignored real-time GPS data.
Ignored the reality on the ground.
Completely. The text highlights two core architectural distortions that guaranteed the system's collapse. the myth of divine infallibility, and the fiction of enemy inferiority.
Let's examine those distortions. The myth of divine infallibility essentially means he viewed his own 40-bit internal map as an unassailable sacred truth, correct?
Correct. He operated under the delusion that his ideological plan was sanctioned by destiny itself. Because he believed his map was infallible, any contradictory data coming from the GPS, meaning the actual empirical reality on the ground, was immediately dismissed.
It wasn't just ignored, right?
No, it was actively punished as a sign of weakness, cowardice, or lack of ideological faith.
What specific historical events does the text analyze to demonstrate this fatal dynamic?
The primary case study is Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Hitler possessed highly experienced generals who were essentially functioning as the military's GPS. They were gathering millions of bits of real-time logistical data.
The actual terrain data.
Right, and these generals warned him repeatedly, using hard data, about the vast, unmanageable distances of the Russian steppes, the severe inadequacy of their supply lines, the mismatched viscosity of their engine oils for extreme cold, and the impending brutal reality of the Russian winter.
Translating that back to our framework, his generals were acting exactly like Google Maps, screaming at him, rerouting, the bridge is out, the conditions on the ground are fatal, the vehicle cannot survive this route.
Precisely. But because the rigid ideological map dictated that the Third Reich was invincible, the driver simply ignored the GPS. He relied entirely on the second distortion, the fiction of enemy inferiority. He genuinely believed the Soviet Union was a colossus of clay that would collapse instantly. He willfully ignored the 11 million bit reality of the weather, the mud, the terrain, and the actual robust mobilization capacity of the enemy.
And the result? Stalingrad?
The horrific result at Stalingrad, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers lost and the momentum of the war permanently broken, was the ultimate catastrophic cost of a driver refusing to adapt to the terrain.
And the text also points out how this exact same architectural flaw blinded him to the reality of the United States, right?
Yes, the pattern repeated itself perfectly. The rigid ideological map viewed the United States as a decadent, mongrelized, and structurally inferior nation. This profound bias completely blinded the strategic command to the empirical GPS data.
Which was what?
The undeniable fact that the U.S. possessed a massive, terrifying industrial capacity capable of manufacturing 300,000 aircraft during the course of the war.
Just an unbelievable amount of production.
He declared war on the U.S. based on ideological fervor and a rigid map, completely ignoring the strategic, logistical calculation. It is the ultimate manifestation of the illusion of unilateral control. The fatal belief that your internal willpower and rigid plans can simply dictate terms to external reality, regardless of the physical facts.
The lesson there is just chillingly clear. When any system, whether it is a dictator's army, a massive multinational corporation, or just an individual trying to force a career path that is destroying their health, decides that its rigid map is supreme and actively ignores the GPS data of reality, it is essentially waging war against the fabric of reality itself.
That's a great way to put it.
And in a war against reality, reality remains undefeated. It always wins.
That is the profound, sobering takeaway. Supremacy, the arrogant belief that your internal map is inherently superior to the actual terrain you are walking on, is a massive strategic liability. The text argues that the only antidote to this fatal architectural flaw is a combination of what it calls empathetic research and neuroception.
We need to define those terms carefully because using a word like empathetic in a discussion about military strategy or ruthless business environments sounds a bit, soft or overly sentimental.
It sounds that way, but it is quite the opposite. In this specific context, empathy has absolutely nothing to do with feeling sympathy or compassion for an adversary. It is purely an epistemological tool.
How so?
It is the ultimate pragmatic advantage. It means having the rigorous humility to accurately assess the reality of the other side. It's recognizing the deep complexity, the ingenuity, and the actual capacity of the world that exists outside your own head. The architect constantly updates their OS by practicing neuroception.
Neuroception. That sounds like an upgraded high-bandwidth version of perception.
Yeah.
How does it actually work?
It is the defining trait of the embodied traveler. The architect practicing neuroception listens with their entire nervous system, not just their conscious intellect. They don't just process the vocabulary being spoken. They read the underlying energy. They assess the context. They feel the environmental shifts.
They're tapped into the 11 million bits.
Exactly. They maintain deep respect for the 11 million bits of data, and they possess the agility to adapt their map in real time. They survive and thrive precisely because they are engaged in a constant, dynamic dialogue with reality, rather than arrogantly trying to dictate terms to it.
This architecture is coming together brilliantly. We have established the mind as the streaming service that curates our attention and focus. We have established the body as the high-fidelity 11 million bit GPS navigating the physical terrain.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have.
Right.
Now, we have to look at the environment we're actually driving the vehicle through. Which brings us to our final major framework, drawn from Chapter 15, Emotions as a Weather System and the Math of Freedom.
Yes. If the physical body is the vehicle, your emotions are the atmospheric conditions you inevitably encounter on the journey.
Chapter 15 introduces a core mantra that is so clarifying. I honestly think everyone should write it on a sticky note and put it on their bathroom mirror. You are the climate, not the weather.
It's so powerful.
Walk us through the mechanics of this metaphor. What does it actually mean to be the climate?
It requires a fundamental shift in how we identify with our feelings. It means understanding that emotions are not permanent identity traits. They are merely passing, transient, atmospheric systems.
Like actual weather.
Exactly. Think about a severe thunderstorm. It rolls in, the sky turns violently black, lightning crashes, the wind howls, and if you are standing out in it, it feels completely overwhelming and eternal.
It feels like it'll never end.
But the sky itself is not destroyed by the storm. The sky simply contains the storm. Eventually, the storm runs out of energy and moves on, and the sky remains.
So if I am experiencing intense anxiety, I shouldn't label myself by saying I am an anxious person, because phrasing it that way elevates the anxiety from a temporary storm to the permanent climate.
Exactly. You are the sky. Anxiety is just a low-pressure system currently moving through your airspace. The text insists that we must demote feelings from being ultimate truths to being simple system alerts.
System alerts.
They are diagnostic messages sent from the 11 million bit GPS to the conscious map. For example, if you feel a sudden, intense spike of anger during a conversation, that anger is not a moral failure or a sign that you are a fundamentally toxic person.
What is it then?
It is simply a diagnostic alert signaling that a personal boundary has been crossed or a core value you hold is being threatened.
It functions exactly like the check engine light turning on in your car.
Yes.
You obviously don't ignore the check engine light, but you also don't immediately assume the car is permanently broken forever and just pull over and set it on fire.
Hopefully not.
You just read the diagnostic code, address the underlying issue, and keep driving.
Which brings us to the most profound structural shift the sources introduce in this entire framework. They refer to it as the math of freedom.
The math of freedom.
Yes, and it represents the literal mathematical upgrading of your internal operating system. It is the calculated shift from the state of R1V to the state of AV1.
Let's break this psychological algebra down slowly, because this is the crux of the architect's power. Let's start with the default mode, the legacy software. What does R1V represent?
R1V stands for a responsive variable. This is the default operating system for the vast, vast majority of humanity. In this mathematical expression, the external world, your boss's mood, the global economy, the news cycle, traffic, other people's opinions of you, is placed in the position of the constant 1.
So the world is the constant.
Yes, the world is treated as the fixed, solid, immovable reality.
And in that equation, the V is the variable, which
Yeah.
represents me.
Yes. You are the variable that is endlessly, frantically reacting and adjusting to the constant demands of the world. You wake up feeling fine, but you check your phone and see a stressful email from your boss, and your mood instantly plummets. In that scenario, your boss is the constant 1, dictating the terms, and you are the V, modifying your state to match their input. You read a highly engineered clickbait headline about inflation, and your chest immediately tightens with fear. The internet algorithm is the 1, and you are the V. The world dictates, and you merely passively respond.
It is the ultimate definition of living entirely within the user interface. You are just mindlessly clicking whatever pop-up advertisement appears in your brain and letting it dictate the trajectory of your entire day.
Exactly.
You have zero internal stability. So how do we rewrite that equation? What is the upgrade to AV1?
AB1 stands for autonomous variable. In this upgraded state, you completely flip the mathematical hierarchy. You choose to hold the position of 1.
You become the one.
You become the internally anchored constant. Your deeply held core values, your somatic wisdom, your deliberate neuroception, these form an unshakable, stable center. And as a result, the chaotic external world is demoted to the status of a variable that you simply observe and navigate.
That is a massive paradigm shift in how a human being relates to reality. So instead of the external weather determining my internal climate, I maintain my climate regardless of what the weather's doing.
Precisely. To be clear, the storms still happen. Becoming the one does not make you immune to reality. The highly stressful email still arrives in your inbox.
Traffic still happens.
The economy still fluctuates wildly. People will still act unfairly. But because you are anchored as the one, you observe those variables without losing your structural integrity. You respond with calculated intention based on your GPS data, rather than reacting on blind autopilot.
To make this abstract math incredibly concrete, I want to do something a little vulnerable. I am going to volunteer for a live feed audit right now, utilizing the protocols outlined in the text. I want to demonstrate exactly how this shift from R1V to AV1 operates in the real world, under pressure.
I think that is an excellent application of the material. Let's walk through the audit. Think of a specific piece of digital content or a specific situation you encountered very recently that immediately threw you into that highly reactive, panicked VEED state.
This literally happened to me just this morning.
Perfect.
I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking my coffee, feeling relatively calm and centered. And out of pure muscle memory, I opened a news aggregator app. The very first thing I saw was a highly sensationalized, terrifying clickbait headline.
Of course.
There's a massive composite of anxieties like the global economy collapsing, hyperinflation, AI taking everyone's jobs within 12 months. It was just a perfectly engineered cocktail of existential dread.
Okay, let's freeze the frame right there. What happened inside your 11 million bit GPS the exact moment your eyes processed that headline? What were the specific physical somatic signals?
The physiological shift was instantaneous. My chest tightened up like a drum. My breathing, which had been deep and relaxed, immediately became fast and shallow, sitting right up in the top of my throat.
Fight or flight.
My jaw clenched so hard, my teeth hurt. I felt a very cold, very real spike of adrenaline and fear right in the pit of my stomach.
You experienced a massive influx of GPS data, signaling an immediate threat. Now, what did the user interface, your 40-bit conscious mind, tell you to do to solve that profound physical discomfort?
My conscious mind immediately fell for the trap. It said, "This situation is terrifying and highly complex. You are in danger. You need more data to understand the threat so you can be safe."
So what did you do?
So I kept scrolling. I clicked the article. I frantically read the doom-laden comments. I navigated over to Twitter to see what other people were saying about the collapse. I was actively trying to numb the anxiety by furiously consuming more of the exact same poison that generated the anxiety in the first place.
In that moment, you were operating firmly and helplessly in the R1V state. The engagement-hungry algorithm was a constant one, setting the terms of engagement and controlling the environment, and you were the reactive V, frantically bouncing around inside the box it built for you. You were allowing a digital string of code to dictate your physical biology and emotional state.
That is exactly what it felt like. I was a complete hostage to the feed. My OS was hijacked. So if I find myself in that exact situation tomorrow morning, how do I apply the math of freedom? How do I wrestle back the position of one in the midst of a cortisol spike?
The sources outline a highly specific tactical intervention for this exact scenario. They call it the embodied disruption.
Embodied disruption.
It is the precise mechanical moment you reclaim the position of one. When you read that headline and you feel that unmistakable chest-tightening, shallow-breathing dissonance, you do two things. You do not ignore the feeling, and you do not feed the feeling.
Okay.
You pause, and you actively, consciously agree with your body's safety over the algorithm's manufactured panic.
Agree with the body over the algorithm. That sounds incredibly powerful. But how do I execute that practically when my brain is screaming at me that the world is ending?
You perform a literal physical reality check. You forcefully pull your attention away from the 40-bit digital map and orient yourself in physical space. You look up from the glowing screen and you say to yourself, my physical body is currently sitting in a sturdy chair at a kitchen table. I am holding a warm ceramic cup of coffee. I am taking a breath.
Right. The roof is not falling in.
Exactly. The roof of my house is not currently falling in. There are no immediate physical threats in this room. I am physically safe in this exact second.
You are forcibly bringing the panicked 40-bit conscious mind back into strict alignment with the actual empirical physical reality that the 11 million-bit GPS is experiencing in the room, rather than the simulated catastrophic digital reality being projected on the screen.
Yes, the digital feed is explicitly designed to scream, "The world is burning right now, you must be terrified, keep clicking." But your physical body, if you actually tune into its environment, is calmly stating, "We are just sitting in a quiet room drinking bean water. Everything is fine."
Bean water. I love that.
Embodied disruption means you allow yourself to feel the physical pain and tension of the junk content. You acknowledge the dissonance by saying, "This content is harming my system," and then you physically close the application.
You just shut it down.
You do not try to outthink the algorithm because the algorithm is smarter than your 40-bit mind. You simply cut off its power supply.
You deliberately step out of the chaotic weather and anchor yourself back into the stable climate. That is an incredibly empowering reframing. It takes the often vague, esoteric concept of mindfulness and, like, weapons grades it into a tactical architectural defense system against an attention economy designed to exploit us.
It really is. It is the ultimate definitive act of moving from the passive user to the active architect. You see the legacy code running the panic script, you analyze the outputs, and you calmly and deliberately hit override.
We have mapped out an absolute mountain of psychological architecture today in Double Feature Part 1.
We really have.
Let's trace the massive shift we've explored. We started at the surface, defining the ubiquitous trap of the user interface, the danger of living entirely in disembodied metrics, tracking screens, and executing outdated legacy software.
From there, we access the back-end code, exploring the mind as a streaming service. We recognize that our attention is driven by a morally neutral, engagement-hungry internal algorithm.
Right.
And we learned how to utilize the four-step circuit breaker protocol to forcefully interrupt the dangerous habit of binge-watching our own anxieties.
We then transitioned from the mind to physical reality, examining the body as a GPS. We mapped the profound conflict between the static, rigid 40-bit map of our conscious plans and the live, updating 11 million-bit reality of our nervous system. We recognized that burnout is not a moral failing, but simply the inevitable cost of chronically ignoring our body's reroute signals.
We scaled that concept up, analyzing the fatal flaw of supremacy in rigid maps on a macro geopolitical level, understanding that forcefully ignoring empirical data leads to systemic collapse. And finally, we navigated the emotional weather system, learning the math of freedom to transition from the highly reactive R1V default state into the grounded, resilient AV1 state through the tactical use of embodied disruption.
It is nothing short of a complete teardown and rebuild of the human operating system.
Yeah.
But as we bring this deep dive to a close, I know that staring at all this new architecture can feel, well, incredibly daunting.
It is an immense amount of data to process, which is exactly why my specific call to action for you, the listener, is rooted in sustainable pacing. Do not attempt to rewrite your entire internal operating system by tomorrow morning.
Please don't.
If you try to execute all of these massive overhauls simultaneously, you will overwhelm the hardware and crash the system entirely. Just pick one single metaphor to experiment with.
Start with just one line of code.
Yes. Perhaps you just notice your mental autoplay today, acknowledging the thumbnails without clicking them. Or maybe you just listen to one single reroute signal from your body. If you notice your jaws tight while typing an email, just stop, stretch it, and acknowledge the data. Take one small, deliberate step toward the back-end code.
And as you take that first step toward becoming the architect, I want to leave you with a final, lingering provocation to mull over as you navigate the rest of your day. If your consciousness truly is a predictive algorithm, one that has been entirely trained by the historical data of what you have paid attention to in the past, what exactly happens to your reality if you deliberately choose to subscribe to 5 uninterrupted minutes of pure, unmonetized awe tomorrow morning?
What does a biological machine strictly built to optimize for engagement do when you forcefully feed it the frequency of wonder?
We will let you run that experiment in your own operating system. Thank you for joining us for Double Feature Part 1. We invite you to join us for the next deep dive as we continue to deconstruct and rebuild the architecture of your reality. Until then, grab the remote. The cue is finally yours.